Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so thrilled today to be joined by the fantastic Lily Rabe to talk all about her latest series, Love and Death. And I was so interested in the facet of developing a character like Betty in this show because, obviously, unfortunately, we don't have her side of events. And so everything that you're constructing and all of the details in building who she is are based on other people's experiences, anecdotes, and relationships with her. And in looking both at the detail of the scripts and the book that it's based on, Evidence of Love, I was really interested in what that journey looked like for you in finding the details and a lot of the common threads in how people would describe her and what felt really important to capture for you.
That's an incredible question. And it does speak to part of what attracted me most about taking on the role. Something after I'd been sent the scripts initially, I had it was still lots of Zoom, but a Zoom with Leslie and David. And something we talked about was this, this kind of, not that David was trying to diagnose her, but there is this feeling of something undiagnosed, and yet something that could have been managed in such a different way had she had certain resources. And I don't even mean necessarily medication. I think a kind of, a forum and a landscape where talking about certain things is welcome, and you're given tools and you don't feel so alone. I think something for Betty that I was so haunted by and fascinated by was that in Kansas, where they come from, everything I read about her and everything I learned about her was that she had been this kind of, she was like a star. She was incredibly popular and easy to love and easy to have a relationship with. And then something that is, because you learn so much about someone through a story by what everyone else says about them. But I think in the case of Betty, so much of it is this, it's a misunderstanding, it's a projection, and it's also a way to kind of silence her and handle her. So, I think Betty was incredibly intelligent. She was an educator. She was devoted to her career. The part in the series where, she's very determined to get pregnant. It was actually because she wanted to have the baby in midsummer so that she wouldn't miss school, so that she could show up for her students. So, I think there is so much that's just misunderstood about her. And I'm always, I guess I did feel I felt the more I learned about her, I felt so protective of her, and I wanted to do, and there's so much we can't know, but given what we do know and what Leslie and David and I all felt about her, I did feel drawn towards taking on the responsibility of giving as much voice to her side of the story as I possibly could. And that was something, that was daunting and sort of remains daunting, but it was definitely part of what I loved about the idea of getting to play her, specifically.
And I love that detail that you were bringing up there about when she was trying to get pregnant and how she wanted to specifically time it to her job, because there's elements, and I've heard you kind of talk about the hypervigilance of the character a little bit. She's very specific with herself and with other people around her, which is probably part of how she kind of puts the details together of Alan having an affair and being unfaithful to her. And what's interesting is it can be perceived as a paranoia, but it's not, because she's absolutely 100% correct. And so did you view that hypervigilance as actually being a really strong attribute and part of what helps her to piece things together for herself?
I did. And I also found it incredibly relatable. She's so different from me in so many ways, which I'm always so attracted to. But it was that kind of when, and I think, to go back to your point about the pregnancy, that's such a perfect example of the things that the stories that we can write, the things that we can say about people, particularly women, and say, oh, she was so controlling. Oh, she was so, in terms of trying to get pregnant at this time. But actually, it's like this act of generosity. She doesn't want to not show, she doesn't want to have a substitute teacher. She doesn't want to miss, so but that's such a kind of crystal clear example of looking at exactly the same thing and writing one story that really has nothing to do with the truth or what her motivations or experience are. And I think that hypervigilance, gaslighting is this, I feel like it was just became like really a word that was just has been so in the zeitgeist. I feel like there was a moment in time where my boyfriend was doing a show called Gaslit. I was doing an episode called Gaslight. And, it was just like but I think for Betty, she's so attuned. And I think, she's operating at a very high frequency. She absorbs everything. And, she doesn't have blinders on. She's highly sensitive. And so probably all of the qualities that she had that made her this incredibly popular person to be around, it's almost like they turn on her because they isolate her, because no one knows what to do with that kind of awareness or vigilance or, frankly, honesty, because she really says what she thinks. And I think, when she feels like something isn't right, even if she's not naming the thing, even if it's not, I think it's an affair, until she knows. But just that sense of, I am not getting the full truth of my life. There is a piece missing. And even before the affair, I think that, she has this sense of something not being quite right. And exactly to your point, she's right, but it isolates her further and further because no one wants to deal with hearing the truth or being sort of confronted with someone who will ask the hard questions. So I was so compelled by that quality in her and how it can be misunderstood and sort of how it really, for her, I think, she is actually trying to, I think there's so much love between her and Alan. And I think she's trying to reach him. But in fact, the way that she's doing it, because it's so kind of truthful, it just isolates her further. But it's not, I don't feel, it's like she's not trying to drive anyone away. She's actually trying to do the opposite.
But I do think there's something incredibly powerful in her saying what she needs and kind of being the person to say, our marriage isn't working right now and I want to fix it. I don't want to live in this space, and so it's very much her volition that leads them to Marriage Encounter. And I've heard you and Jesse talk about how the two of you really discuss the idea of feeling like if they'd had more time together, that their relationship really would have mended and they would have made it. And so how did the two of you find that space of what does it look like as they've gone through this journey at Marriage Encounter, as we see them in the rest of the series, where it hasn't fixed everything in their relationship, but the foundational blocks of building it back together are kind of starting to piece together, and they're starting to find more elements of intimacy and communication with each other?
It feels like, and it was such a wonderful thing to navigate with him, because we really we felt similarly about it in terms of our kind of approach and belief in their relationship. But I also think we had an ease with one another. Like when we met, we just felt like we'd known each other for a very long time, in that wonderful way that, it happens with people. And we work similarly, I think, in a lot of ways. So that dance of that relationship and sort of this lost potential, and that delicate, like you said, it's not that they go there and everything is perfect. Nothing that, I mean, listen, if that place existed, right? But it's enough of a shift. It's not a Band-Aid, because I think it's really something real has shifted. Something sort of fundamental has shifted. And to me, what it feels like is they had gotten to the end. They were set out on this sort of path of their relationship. They'd gotten to a place where they felt like they were at a kind of, there was like a roadblock that they didn't know how to navigate. And then they go to Marriage Encounter, and it's outrageous in certain ways, and it's ridiculous, but there's something really tangible that happens there in terms of their connection. And they kind of drop their shoulders and just see one another. And then it's like they look to the left, and they realize that, okay, this roadblock might be in front of us, but there's actually this whole other path that we can sort of now walk towards to the left, that we didn't know, like we weren't looking in that direction. And so it really is, it's so sad that they don't get more of a chance to sort of, because that's all it is. It's like they haven't arrived at any kind of destination, but they're just walking, they've just kind of like pointed themselves in down this other path that feels like things will be possible there.
And I think that opportunity to kind of explore what that looks like for the two of them is such a great example of how you've described David E. Kelley's writing, in that as an actor, the writing always gives you a lot of space between the lines on the page to really discover and to really find things. And even, the way that goes back to what you were talking about at the beginning of, you don't need to kind of specifically diagnose Betty, but you can have essences of truth within that still to find as you play her. And so how did the way that he'd written the scripts with that space in between, particularly for a character like this in the show, really, really help you in a lot of ways?
He does it so remarkably, the space in between. But you do really need a director and a scene partner who are willing to live in that space in between as well. And I think for Betty, it's David doesn't, none of his characters ever feel like foils. They all feel, in support of this greater thing, which is the story, and easier said than done, in terms of what, building a show when you have a ton of storylines. Not that there are so many in this, but there, it's like there's whatever real estate there is in an hour of television. But I think he just is remarkable at you never feel when you're playing one of his characters or living out a relationship that he's written that you're not in a constant place of discovery, that you're sort of, oh, this is the purpose of this, or this is like, it just always feels like the relationships and the characters sort of have continued to reveal themselves to him. And so there's like a lot of generosity in the way that they're built, if that makes sense. So because I guess what I'm really saying, which would just be sort of like a more kind of crude way to say it, is it would be so easy to tell this story of an affair with the these two characters who are being cheated on, and have it become one dimensional so quickly, whether in the acting or the writing or the editing. Frankly, like, you could do a lot of great work and then have it edited in a way where it's like, well, this person is sort of, of course there was an affair, but it was like from go, that was so clearly not what he was interested in, or what Leslie was interested in, or what we, the four of us who were playing the parts were interested in. You don't, it's not a story about a bad relationship. And it's also not, until it is, it's not a story about a bad affair. So that's what's, and I think that's what's so interesting. That was what was so wonderful about making it. I imagine that's part of what's wonderful about watching it. There's no finger pointing, and there's no sort of, well, of course this happened because of X. There's like a tremendous amount of surprise and delicacy in the storytelling, and really had at any point any number of things gone just slightly differently, it all could have, and I don't even mean the murder, I mean like the affair itself, or what happens, in the other relationships, it all could have ended up so, it's just so delicate. And I think he looks at that in such an amazing way.
And there's a lot of delicacy as well in the writing and in your performance, in terms of just those subtle differences in who is Betty when she's in her home with her husband and her kids, and who is she when she is out in the world with other people. Because
Yeah.
as much as, she's very comfortable being the person to say out loud what everyone's thinking, she's also very aware of, this is a small, tight-knit community where everybody knows everything about you. Like at the volleyball game where she's sitting on the bench, and one of the other churchgoers is like, well, it makes sense because you're trying to get pregnant. And that's a very private and personal detail to her at the time. And so how did you kind of look towards the writing and find those subtleties and those little differences of behavior that would be a little bit different in the home to out with other people?
Oh, that just felt like that was her to me. She felt like a shapeshifter in a way. And I think it's part of how she navigates her own pain, but it's also part of what it is to be a woman at that time in this very small community. Because even though, yes, she does have this ability to be incredibly honest and direct, but she also does want to be accepted and liked. And even with things like with the dialect, because I worked with someone really wonderful, and Jesse and I, we talked about it a lot before we started. But they come from Kansas, so it's like they have a totally different dialect. But I think that Texan, it's not just the dialect, it's also just the kind of buoyancy to it is something that rubs off on Betty, depending who she's talking to, depending where she is. And so, those people who you can almost tell who they've been with when they come home, because they just, like, a little bit of that person has rubbed off on them when they walk through the door. And I think maybe even in spite of herself, she has a little bit of that. so I so appreciate that you felt that, because that was something, that there is such discomfort for her in her own skin, whatever that even means. Um, because of course she is in her own skin. This is what it is. But I think it was there's a lot of there is a lot of discomfort, and that shift. And then if you're out in public, if she's out in public at the game, sort of trying to wear the hat in that moment of being the wife on the sidelines, and someone brings something private up, it's so jarring. And she doesn't, it's like she's sort of a raw nerve. She doesn't have, I think her truth is like right there at the surface, and then she kind of has to uh, cover it and do whatever dance she's going to do. But it's like her immediate response to things is so vulnerable.
It is. And I did also want to talk a little bit about filming the confrontation in the laundry room with you and Elizabeth and Leslie, who was directing that episode, because there's so much delicacy in a scene like that. And I think especially even when you look at the moment where Betty comes back with the axe and having to make the audience understand how that is a natural, progression for her and a natural choice for her to make. Because the scene when the two of you are initially discussing the affair and that kind of coming out in the open feels like something that Betty has considered. And then as the scene progresses and moves forward, everything becomes very instinctual and very reactionary instead of considered. And so how did you find that gradual journey from a place where she's really thought about what is happening to a place where she's simply responding in the moment more and more?
I feel so seen by that question. That question makes me so happy. We shot the scene for, I think it was 4 days with like a weekend in between. And then we rehearsed it, and that was a scene that was sort of, that was blocked based on Candy's testimony. But I've never quite, it was an entirely unique experience shooting that scene. And it did feel a bit like, I don't know if I can tell you exactly how I did it or what I did, because I knew what I knew in terms of, I think Betty, she has that question right there. I don't think she knows she's going to say it until she says it, but she certainly has considered saying it. But she doesn't know that it's all happening in real time. It's not like, she could never have imagined any of it, even if she's imagined asking that question, which I'm sure, to your point, she has a million times up at night thinking about it. But then suddenly there they are in that situation, and the moment has sort of arrived, and it happens. And from that moment on, it just felt like I don't know, stepping onto something that was moving. And the propulsion of what was happening felt like, it almost felt like a kind of like sustained piece of music. But I do think that her sort of conscious thought of what comes next, even if it's there a little bit at the beginning, it just goes away. And so even when I go to get the axe, I don't believe I'm not thinking beyond that. I'm not going to the garage to get it. I go to the garage to get out of the room and there it is, you know, or it's like everything is just happening. As it's happening, it's some in wild collision of fight, flight, freeze, like everything is happening all at once. But there's no, for me, and certainly in the playing of it, nothing felt, and less and less so as we get through the scene, nothing felt, you know, sort of premeditated in any way.
It's also physically a very different scene as it progresses as well. And I was really struck by just the incredible stillness at the beginning when you first walk out with the axe in that moment, and Betty just standing there kind of without moving. And then again, it you know, becomes to that place of that sense of having no safety and that fear of everything that I've built around me is being taken away from me. And once it kind of that realization hits in, it physically also reaches a very different space. And I know Leslie wanted to be very specific about the detailing of how that all played out as well. And so what did that look like in working with Leslie and working with Elizabeth Olsen to really just block out and choreograph it on top of everything that you were just talking about that you had to do on the emotional side?
We had blocked out just really by numbers at first. You know, we'll start here, we'll go here, then we go up, you know, and then there's the time where the door opens and the, you know, it was like really, and we sort of started there. And then we just started to move through it. And we had doubles. I was very pregnant at the time, but I was, you know, I love, pregnant or not, I always, it's just, in a way, it's, for me, being pregnant is actually irrelevant in terms of my desire to do as much physical work as I possibly can when I'm playing a part. I always am interested in it. I always want to do it. Of course, you know, I always want to be safe. I always want to keep my scene partner safe. I certainly want to keep my, you know, baby safe, but it's almost like, but I just believe so strongly that a woman knows, you know how, pregnant women can do anything physically that they feel they can do. It's for every woman to sort of decide for herself. And it's not, and for me, it just has always felt right. I've worked through all of my pregnancies and I've just never felt limited by it. And listen, I've had, like, I might be sometimes there's like a trash can next to the camera because I'm throwing up, but it's still, I still just feel, I don't know, it's just never felt like a limitation. And so I was really determined to do as much as I possibly could. And then there were things that I couldn't do that the stunt double would do. I mean, specifically, like, you know, there was like there were times when I had to be sort of forward in a way that, you know, and I had this belly. But I could do so much of it and I wanted to. And I learned so much through I'm trying to think if I'm really answering your question, but about, you know, the physical part of it. I guess yes, I am. This is really what I'm trying to say, is that the physical part of it, I'm not excellent at separating them. In other words, to kind of to track the emotional journey of a role and then track the kind of physical beats of what we're going to be doing. Of course, you do that, but then for me, the thing really lives in getting to do them both at the same time and not feeling like you have to kind of do one and then the other. But of course, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I really think it's so, because I don't, it's just kind of my taste for myself. Because I also know some actors, like, they don't want to, and I don't, there's no right answer or sort of, I think it really is just, and maybe it is because I feel like so much of, my early journey as a performer was as a dancer. So it was like my body it told me everything about performing. And so, yeah, any opportunity I have to be able to do as much of whatever it is physically, I do always want to do it. I mean, I was saying at another interview, like, it's not just about stunts. It's like, I also don't like to have hand doubles. Like, I want to open the letter myself because it's part of the performance. And sometimes the schedule doesn't allow for it. Of course, there's always exceptions, but if I can do it, and then I want to.
I really, really love that. And it's so wonderful watching your performance in this series, and kind of, you can tell how much care you've taken in the way that you've developed Betty as a character on screen. So congratulations on the show. And thank you so much, Lily.
Thank you. This was such a pleasure. Your questions were really amazing. Thank you.